They put us nice and cosy on here.
Yes,
so,
lovely
yes,
cosy, yes.
Come and take a seat.
An honour to be on the stage at Sadler as well, as you don't get to do that very often.
No, not without your point shoes.
No.
Can HR shape the future of work?
I think it can, and I think it has to. I mean, you've heard from a number of speakers today, you just heard from Alan about how much is changing in the world of work. I have been using this expression for a while. I think we are genuinely at an inflection point. I do not think that we can carry on building the future of work in the ways that we have in the past. We are seeing so much more diversity in how organizations work, how people work. I was reading a survey the other day about how many people are flexi-working or working self-employed or freelance, and a projection that as much as 40% of the workforce could work in that way. And yet our organizational models, our policies, our practices, our legislation, it's all very geared to old ways of working. So, at the heart of a lot of this debate, I fundamentally believe HR has got to be there, because the future of work is human. The future of work is human. And a lot of the work systems we've been creating, command and control structures, policies and rules and all these other things, have been putting people in boxes. And the result of a lot of that is people are not happy at work, they're not engaged enough, we've got breakdowns of trust, we're not using our skills properly, etc., etc. So at the heart of that debate has to be people, and that is what the HR function should be about.
So we're seeing it, and we had examples today. We've had obviously Amy from Virgin, Yvonne from Google. I mean, these are some big names that arguably are transforming the future of work today. How do we kind of roll it? Because it always seems like the same kind of names always come up.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so you can look at the debates about holocracies, and it's always Zappos or WL Gore or Morningstar or whatever, or the companies that Alan just put up. You're right. I mean, we do see lots of the same sorts of examples, but what I'm seeing now is I think, genuine innovation and a lot more courage to change. Now, whether it's because we've seen organizations like Virgin or Zappos or whoever trying different things, and then the rest of us are looking at that and saying, well, honestly, if they can do it, then why can't I? But I look at examples like performance management. We have a lot of debate about performance management. I've been saying for a very long time, what is the purpose of performance management? And it's not a trick question. The purpose of performance management should be to improve performance, and it's a very central process within our kind of HR toolkit. Yet it hasn't really been improving performance. It's been a distraction in a sense that managers then think that the only time they need a developmental conversation with somebody is on their 6-month or annual review, and then we've all forgotten what they were supposed to be developing on, forgotten what their objectives have changed, etc., etc. And we're saying the heart of good performance management is about people having conversations all the time, giving feedback to people as and when they do their job, so it's relevant, it's in that point in time, and we know what we're all talking about. And that kind of innovation is going on in all sorts of organizations. I mean, my alma mater, Accenture, had performance management in the traditional form, rank and yank, handed down in tablets of stone. Nobody can ever remember who came up with it. I do remember everybody thinking, good God, we spend a lot of time on this stuff, and we, excuse my French, piss off at least half the organization in the process. And now people are having more courage to say, well, let's go back to first principles. What is the purpose of the process? Now let's start from that and reinvent. So I think I'm an optimist, and I think genuinely with all these kind of changes going on, organizations of all shapes and sizes are starting to take more courage to innovate and to rip up the old rule books, to move away from the idea there is some magical best practice. As long as we just do this, then everything's fine. And instead start to come back to fundamentals. What's the purpose of my organization? What's the context I'm operating in? What kind of workforce am I trying to build for the future? What sort of talent do I need? What are my core capabilities versus what I'm going to bring in from other places? And create the model that works for you. And I think this is really what it's about.
Well, a lot of those companies that we talked about earlier are kind of led either by, let's say, slightly younger, more dynamic people, or the Richard Bransons of this world who've always
challenged
the norms. Because then it seems like it's happening from really the C-suite or the founder, and it's not necessarily being driven by HR.
Well, I mean, I think if we're saying what's going on, which is a sort of cultural and mindset shift about what's important about work and how we create very different types of organizations, then as they always say, culture starts from the top. And if the chief executive or the leadership don't get this stuff and think everything's just fine, thank you very much, and why change anything when that's not the focus of the business or whatever, then yes, that's not an easy place to start. But I just honestly, I talk to many business leaders, and they're not living in some parallel universe. I mean, they'd see these things going on. And if you take, I don't know, my generation of business leaders, the baby boom generation of business leaders, a lot of them have children. I have children. I have 3 daughters. They are all coming into a world of work that's fundamentally different. I see that every day in my conversations with them. 2 of them went to university and one's doing an apprenticeship. And they are finding the life of work very different, but also their expectations of work are different. They're not saying, I must join this organization because I'm going to spend the rest of my life there. They're saying, well, I'll try this for a while, and if it works, it works, and if it does not, go somewhere else. So I think business leaders are being confronted on the reality of this fast-changing context we're in lots of different ways, whether it's their own children, their own employees, the reality that they can't recruit the people they used to recruit in the past. That 40% of organizations today can't fill all the jobs they need to fill. We're looking at all these challenges of skills mismatches and everything else, and nobody is immune from that. So I think business leaders are seeing this, and I think more and more of them are now pointing to perhaps their internal processes, their functions, and HR in particular, and saying, you need to help me change this organization. You need to help me respond to these changing contexts, the changing expectations of the workforce, and you've got to help me build a better business, a business that's sustainable for the long term. And I'm seeing a lot more of that rhetoric going on, which is very encouraging.
You live in a very female-dominated household.
Yeah.
How much of the world of work, and we've kind of alluded to it here earlier on, is actually going to be driven by women?
It's really interesting. Anybody see that McKinsey report that came out a little while ago that estimated, and I haven't gone through all their calculations, but they said if we got gender equality in its fullest sense, that would drive an additional $12 trillion to the global economy by 2025, so in 10 years.
That little?
Well, it's interesting, Katie, because actually if you look at the gap now between male and female employment, what do you think it is? Do you think that it's 20%, 30%?
Actually, people fully employed.
Yeah, women and men working in the workplace.
That's what you mean by employment, isn't
well,
it?
Absolutely,
I wrote a book about portfolio careers,
sure,
and that's, you can
if you
work
say,
for many companies.
No, you're absolutely right. And of course, that's a very important point about the future work. The future work is all these different things. People working portfolio jobs and flexi working, etc. But there is now a 10% gap between women and men working. So of whatever that form of work is.
You mean the numbers of?
Yes,
or do you
numbers
mean
of women.
The pay differential?
No, we can talk about that as well. But no, just the gap in numbers of women, that has shrunk from 40% in 20 years. Now, a lot of it is because of flexi working. The biggest growth in the work of jobs has been 85% of the jobs growth since the global recession has been in small enterprises, small to medium-sized enterprise, and 58% of all jobs have been in micro-enterprises, which is less than 10. Most of the employment of women has been in micro-enterprises, self-employed, job sharing, flexi working, all those other things. So on the one hand, you can say, well, actually, that's progress, right? More women working, and of course, many women have caring responsibilities, so flexi working works for women, but it works for men as well, incidentally. So that's good, but we've still got a lot of gaps. And I'm a big champion and believer in diversity and inclusion. It's a hugely important thing. And we still have a massive gap in terms of women sustaining careers to higher levels. So to touch on the gender pay gap thing, which we're all going to have to report on, and I don't think, incidentally, that just saying, here's my average pay difference is the right thing to be talking about. I look at it in the CIPD, not a big organization, 400 people. There is a difference between the median and the mean as to what I talk about, men and women's pay. I think the real issue of gender pay difference is the jobs that women do versus the jobs that men do. And it is both about the level that women tend to get to, and a lot of women, as we know, fall out of the system, and it's kind of the glass escalator thing, or that the higher paid jobs and things like, say, IT, are not predominantly done by women, they're done by men. So the real issue, which is hidden inside this Gordian knot that we've now all got to report on, of gender pay gap, is actually how you get more women into things like STEM skills and IT sector or the higher paid sectors. Is it that we can ever aspire to achieve equality of women all the way through the executive ranks? Is that what women want? Which is, I think, is also a very important debate.
Well, it's a big question itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just sticking with you know, the HR and certainly about, you know, you say the future of work is human. How do we get this across when the exec is pretty much solely focused? They may say one thing, but they're solely focused on, let's deliver Q1, let's deliver Q2. If we can do some nice things and people are just generally happy or cheery, that's lovely too. But actually,
it's about this short-term delivery.
Just deliver it, right?
Yeah, and to me, this is one of the paradigms of work that we absolutely have to change for the future. Because the reality is businesses are very short-term driven. You know, the capital markets, we've talked about this for ages, we had the K review, all these other things, that said, how do we break the cycle of continued short-term focus? Now, there are some companies, like, you know, Unilever, very famously, Paul Palmer, the chief executive, said, I'm not going to give you forecasts for the next quarters because we're playing a long game. And if you're an investor, you're going to be with me for the long game or don't, you know, go and invest in somebody else. I think you know, the first level, it comes down to a shift in what we measure. Because it is this old adage, you know, what gets measured gets done. I think we are not measuring the right things.
So what should we be measuring?
Well, we should make a much more inclusive, balanced scorecard of what we expect organisations to deliver on. Of course, yeah, any commercial enterprise should be managing its budgets and delivering its profitability, but not at the expense of everything else. So what are those longer-term things that we should be measuring? What about their responsibility and how they're supporting their customers, their suppliers, the environment, the communities which they serve, socially responsible enterprises and all those other things. But this goes all the way up to a sort of macroeconomic debate as well. It was Bobby Kennedy, you know, the brother of John F. Kennedy, who said, the thing about GDP is it measures everything but that which is truly important. And we're now, I think, in that debate as well. What economically, or what at a national level should we be measuring? We've got all these gross national happiness debates going on. Cameron's talked about national happiness. We talk about one of the happiest nations in the world. You know, you often point to a place like Denmark or Bhutan. It used to be Bhutan. I think it's now shifted. There's a very fundamental debate to be had about what we should be measuring and what we should be holding organizations accountable for. And I think we've got to move from a world of market capitalism, which is about short-term delivery and reward systems that you know,
that's the thing, they get rewarded
build on
for
that, absolutely, to an inclusive capitalism that says that a good capital system, if you like, is one that supports all these different dimensions. And that we have to find measures that both focus management, focus shareholders, and focus everybody else on the long-term consequences of actions and building sustainable and responsible enterprises just as much as what they deliver in the short term. And that's something we're really trying to champion. And what I find interesting in that debate, which is again points to the inflection point, is, I mean, let's take long-term investors, pension funds. We talked to the National Association of Pension Funds, the Investors Association, and various others. And increasingly the investors saying, yeah, we get it. The things that are on the balance sheet, that are on the P&L statement, are all backward-looking, they're all short-term. They tell me nothing about your investment in your people, your building your leadership capabilities, your future workforce stuff, and so forth. And we want more on that. We want more on that. Because if we're going to invest in this business for the long term, those are the dimensions that count. So I think, you know, market capitalism to inclusive capitalism, or, you know, throw out another phrase, to move from accounting to accountability. And you can't change behavior unless you measure some of these things better. And you can look at any number of why have we gotten to ourselves in some of these states with all this corporate behavior. VW and, you know, well, I don't know if I need to apologize to anybody who works for VW. I apologize to those of you who've been caught up in the mess that's been created by a company like VW. What drove them to do what they did? They were focused on the short-term results. They were focused on car sales into the United States in order to drive up their quarterly earnings.
Deliver it. Just deliver the goods.
Yeah. And damn the consequence.
Okay, so let's talk about, so that's, you know, that's slightly depressing. Let's talk about, there are...
Yeah, I don't know. Depends on your view.
There are a number of companies that you go, I know you go to speak to a lot of CEOs and a lot of companies. Who's getting this right?
Well, as I said, and as we touched on already, I think there are an increasing range of organizations now who are starting to go back to say, okay, what is the purpose of this enterprise? You know, some of the stuff that Alan was talking about. So as an organization, what's our purpose? What do we believe in? You know, what are these values? We might have written up on them all somewhere, but, you know, it's a bunch of blah unless we're living them. What is it that's going to create a sustainable future for us, particularly in all this changing context? And how do we drive, therefore, a different culture and a different mindset and a different belief system if that's what we're going to change. So yes, as we said, you can look at the small companies, you can look at large companies. I think we're seeing more and more companies address this sort of issue. I was talking last week to one of the big government departments about this, and they're talking about the same sort of stuff. What's our purpose as a government department? What values do we need to live by? And how do we create a future workforce that is going to be increasingly, we've digitized a lot of our services. We're going to make sure that we're delivering value for money, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that we're building engaging and purposeful work for our employees, and that we've empowered them to do the right thing for their customers. And so we're seeing, I think, this debate everywhere. So as I said before, I'm an optimist, and I think this is the time for us to be challenging ourselves, and I'm seeing a lot of that challenge actually happening.
And you say you're an optimist. What makes you optimistic? I mean, are there companies, other than perhaps the Googles and the Virgins?
Yeah, no, as I said, I think I can see this more and more. And what I always say to people, go challenge it in your own organisation. If you have a CEO that doesn't always get this stuff, and we know they don't always get this stuff, and it's partly because of the way they've been brought up, or they come only through a finance function, or they're only rewarded in certain ways, is go start to talk about this stuff. I mean, I have found nobody is not interested in talking about, it's a bit of a double negative, but everybody's interested in talking about what's going on with the workforce and all these generational differences and what's happening with the nature of work and all these surveys about the technology impact of the future of work stuff, which we might touch on in a second. Everybody's interested in this stuff, and it affects every organisation, and it affects all of us. So there's the context, and I think particularly as an HR profession, that is our context to understand the changing nature of work, the changing nature of the workforce, and the changing nature of the workplace. Go engage with your management and talk about these things.
But what do you engage with? Because a lot of these people are, focused on a single bottom line.
Yes, we'll start. If that's where you have to start with the numbers. Start with the numbers. I mean, how many vacancies have we got? What's happening to our staff turnover? What are the younger population in our workforce saying? How long are they staying? What's happening to our ageing workforce? And we've got ageing workforces in so many businesses. It's like the old frog in the boiling water stuff. We've been talking about ageing workforces for a long time. We got organisations in many different...
They're still going. They're still alive.
Sorry?
They're still alive.
Yes. And many of them will keep working a lot longer too. I mean, they say the baby boom generation reinvented a lot of things. It's reinventing retirement too. But the reality is...
It means you won't be able to retire.
It means I won't be able to, but I won't want to. Not only will I know what you asked Alan what his purpose is, I mean, I don't know. I think there's so many exciting things going on. I don't want to retire for a very long time. Now, all my employees coming up behind me, particularly younger generations, might think, why didn't you just bugger off so I could do your job? But the reality is that I think economically, as an older generation, we're going to have to keep working longer. We're going to live longer. We haven't saved enough money. So there are economic reasons for it as well. But as I said, I think you talk to your management teams about, so this is what's going on in our workforce today. Here's some basic data. And it doesn't have to be deep analytics always. I think sometimes, of course, analytics and metrics are important. But let's start with the basics. What's the makeup of a workforce? How's that changing? What are we trying to build for in the future? I mean, I find that lots of examples going on now which have been triggered by certain things. So in the retail sector, I'm sure many of you work in retail. The living wage has undoubtedly caused a very different debate across the retail sector about what the future of work is going to look like in the retail sector. That 1 in 6 people in the UK work in the retail sector today. You probably saw on the front page of the Financial Times, if you read the FT, that the British Retail Consortium estimated that 1 million jobs would go out of the retail sector in the next 10 years. 1 in 3 jobs, right? Now that, in part, has been triggered by the living wage debate. So the retailers have looked at this. A lot of them employ minimum wage workers, and they say, oh my God. The first reaction, interestingly, when this was all announced by Osborne, by the CBI amongst others, well, this is going to, everyone would have to shed jobs to cut cost. And now people are taking, I think, a longer-term view of this, which is, okay, so we've got to absorb the living wage. Actually, the living wage, to me, is about economically looking after, it's a financial well-being issue, and we should be paying our employees a decent wage. So let's absorb that in our cost models, but let's think more strategically about how do we make sure that productivity grows in order to support the growth of the living wage. And productivity is an economic output of work. Well, you know the stats in the UK, right? Everybody says that we're 20% less productive than our European neighbours. So there's this old headline that says if the French stopped working on Friday, then we'd still be less productive. And most people say, I didn't think they worked on Friday anyway. We're 30% less productive than the United States. So in the retail sector, they're saying we're going to absorb the living wage, but we're going to do it by productivity increase, and we're going to get to productivity increase by investing more in automation in the workplace, which in part will mean fewer jobs, but hopefully the jobs that are left are better jobs. Because the reality also in the world of work that we've created, particularly in the UK, is a very egg-timer-shaped jobs economy. We've got a huge number of low-skilled jobs. You know, the living wage will impact 1 in 6 workers in the UK. That's a huge proportion, sorry, 1 in 5. 20% of the workforce. That is a huge proportion of a highly qualified and skilled workforce to be working in minimum wage jobs. We have not, in this country, invested enough in the workplace. We have not put enough in terms of technology to grow productivity. We're not creating progression routes and enough meaningful work for people. And that is not what we can do for the long-term future, both economically, but also for the best for our people.
So where do you see technology? You've mentioned it several times, and Helmut is a keen proponent of it.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure he is.
How do you see that future? Because this is something you talk about a great deal, but how's technology going to help us? Because in some senses it's going to cut jobs, and in other senses you say, well, actually, I'm quite excited about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, technology is such an interesting thing. I mean, if you look at from your everyday life, you'd say it's enabled us hugely. You know, we can shop wherever we want, we can buy holidays online. It's enabled our lives hugely. I would contend that in the workplace, for a lot of us, it hasn't really done that. It's made our lives more stressful, it's often enslaved us. We've used technology in many circumstances that I've seen to disempower and de-skill the job. So we've got to think very differently about technology in the workplace. You look at all these surveys, I'm sure you've read them. The Osborne and Frey and the Deloitte study from 2014 that suggested that 47%, a very precise number, 47% of jobs in the US economy would disappear by 2025. Sorry, in the next 2 decades, so 2035. Andy Haldane, the chief economist of the Bank of England, said the same thing. Half the jobs in the UK would disappear in 20 years because of technology. And
Retail jobs or all jobs?
Well, all jobs. He said 15 million jobs in the UK economy disappear through technology. What we don't know is, well, what does that mean? Does it mean half the jobs are gone, so half the people aren't working? Or could we all work half as hard? That would be quite nice, wouldn't it? Because the reality is that we're all actually working hard. All the surveys show, incidentally, that when you ask people how hard do they think they're working working harder and harder. Even though the official stats suggest the number of hours we're working a week is now down to 36 hours. Interestingly, in Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands, it's 28 hours because they're more productive. So one output or outcome, but we've really got to design for this, could be that technology genuinely enables us to work less hard for fewer hours, and that we can therefore get more balanced lives. Now, would that be a good outcome?
I was promised that about 20 years ago.
Well, exactly. Well, actually, it was John Maynard Keynes 100 years ago said by now we should be working 15-hour weeks, based on his estimation.
Are you?
No, I'm working 15-hour days most of the time, like most of us, right? So is that the future we want? That we will design for a future, because of technology being able to do all these jobs, where we can all work less hard. If we could magically wave a wand to distribute the remaining work between all of us evenly, and then we could all work, I don't know, 15 or 20 hours a week. I mean, maybe. I just don't know how you design for a future like that instantly. But all the history would suggest so far, and I know the past is always a predictor of the future, that every time we've developed new technology, created new things, new jobs, we create other jobs around them. So that is why John Maynard Keynes' prediction in part hasn't come true. But what I do believe fundamentally is that, yes, I do think that technology, we have choice. We have choice. And to come back to the role of HR, what I said the future work is about people as human, is we have got to do a better job of designing the job of the human alongside the machine. Because just because artificial intelligence and robots and all these other things can do all of these things, doesn't mean that they should. What's the job that's left for humans? What are humans best at? Interestingly, there's a thing becoming known as Moravec's paradox, which is the longer that we have had an innate skill as a species, the harder it is to replicate. And our longest standing skills as a human species are sensory motor skills and things like emotion. You know, all the neuroscience and all the stuff that Alan and others talk about, we all know that the deep-rooted part of our brain is the emotional brain. The neocortex, the rational part of our brain, evolved later. That's the stuff you can replicate through artificial intelligence, because it's computational. All these other stuff, like creativity, judgment. It was Klaus Schwab, you should read some of the stuff that he writes about. He's the founder of the World Economic Forum. He talks about us now approaching the 4th industrial revolution, which is a combination of digital, physical, and biological. And he says it very profoundly. He says, if we don't design a future that uses our human skills better, then we will robotize work, we will robotize our existences, and how can that be the future that we want to create? And he points to the same idea, that we are at an inflection point, that we have not been using technology in the best ways, we've not been designing work for humans in the best ways, that, all these progression routes and all these other things. And to me, gosh, talk about an agenda for our profession. That is right at the heart of it. And we've got to move, therefore, in HR, not just talking about our traditional talent management, people management stuff. We've got to start to design work and design jobs and design organizations much better with the human in mind.
Okay, we've got one last question, so we're running out of time. Your vision, because you spend a lot of time thinking and writing about this and speaking about this, what is your vision of the future of work? And I say when we get this right, that's not the right thing to say. Just in terms of how we can be more human. Yeah,
so I think in terms of vision for future work, a number of things that you can say. I love that. Some of you may have heard me use it before. But I love that quote from William Gibson, the science fiction writer, who said, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. We talked about lots of different examples. So one thing that you can be absolutely sure of about the future work is it will be way more diverse than anything we've experienced in the past. The old kind of command and control structures, we all worked in organizations, we all did jobs, we all climbed career ladders and all the rest of it, all disappearing very fast. So much, much more diversity. Diversity in ways we work, how we work, where we work, what jobs we do, when we do them, how many different careers we'll have. So the death of the average job, the death of the average organization, the death of the average career. Therefore, the death of best practice. Because best practice applies if you're doing everything the same, but if you're doing everything different, you've got to choose what is right for your context. So that is true for the future of work. But I also believe, as I said, that we have it in our hands to create a better future that is better for people, for their well-being, better, more inclusive in terms of diversity of opportunity, better balance and fairness of reward, because that's not right either. That we rebuild trust in enterprises, that people believe in what they do, they have purpose and meaning. Because to come back to the biggest thought of all, I just heard Alan talk about it, what is the purpose of work? What's the purpose of work? Now, at one level, of course, the purpose of work is, we exchange our time for economic return. But we also know, and we've known this throughout humanity, that it isn't just about the financial return of work that motivates. It's about these other things. It's about creating meaning, social connection, improving myself, learning stuff. That's humanity. But I love going back and quoting Aristotle, because Aristotle talked about the meaning of life. Anybody read this? Remember this stuff? So Aristotle said that the meaning of life was, the outcome of humanity was to create happiness and contentment. He said we were the only species on the planet capable of that, because we're the only sentient species on the planet, and that should be the outcome of humanity. And that should be the outcome of work. Or it was, as Sigmund Freud said, there are only two things in life, work and love. Right? Now, I'm not sure if I entirely believe that paradigm, but the reality is,
why not?
Well, maybe why not? So if we are all going to continue to work, which I think we will, then let's make work better, as I say, supporting all those different dimensions I've already described, and more human, and therefore creates greater contentment and a better, ultimately, an outcome for humanity. And I can't think of a bigger agenda for HR than that.
I can't think of a better place to finish.
Yeah.
Peter Cheese, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Katie.
Thank you.